Well, been fiddling around. It looks as if I managed to get us back live. And welcome to the second string of our show this morning. And this is Mirador Bits. And we're going to show you a couple of things from our past. And first, let's kick off with something just about me, as if you haven't had enough of that. Let's here we go. Suck it in the sea. The Wild Colonial Boy. Well, I disappeared to Canada when I was 18. And what an adventure I had over there. Oh, I've had lots of adventures in my life, and as I tell more stories, some of them will be set in Northern Ireland, some in the Balkans, some in Russia, some in Africa, many different stories, some sad, some funny, some interesting, I think. But while I was in Canada, I used to earn a few bob after I became a journalist, because in those days, even there, and it wasn't anywhere near as bad as it was here in the 70s, you needed to have a union ticket to read the news. So I held a union ticket. That union ticket also allowed me to appear in movies, so I made extra money from being an extra. That's jolly good fun. You rub shoulders with the stars. They haven't a clue who you are. And they're very polite, most of them, but they say yes, no, whatever. But generally speaking, they don't care, and why should they? They don't give a hoot. But it is good fun, and I mean, I was making $80 for an extra there, and when I did the same thing in Belfast, I got £80. So £80 is about $110 or so. Not a fortune, but enough to go and have a few drinks, and it was absolutely marvellous, terrific money. One movie that I was asked to be an extra in was Carnal Knowledge with Anne Margaret. Isn't that boy? It was the first supposedly daring film to do with sex. Oh, no, it wasn't pornographic. But we had to appear at parties and so on and so forth. So the shots were taken. I think I was on that particular film for about 2 days. And it's a good experience, it's a great experience. I would never have not wanted to do it. But the shooting finished, and I think I was supposed to appear at a cocktail party and again walking along the street or whatever. I can't really remember exactly the scenes. But none of them were pornographic, I can tell you that. A few years later, not too many years later, I was working in Belfast, and a new director came. And I looked, and I knew his face. And as you often do, you start to search together. Where have we met? And we tried to think in the UK and so on and so forth. And then he suddenly said, because I was a director at CBC in Vancouver, I said, I was worked for the CBC in Vancouver. Who did you work for? And we went down that route, and eventually we discovered that there were people jointly that we knew, and that we'd started to do movies, and he'd been an extra. And he said, you know, I loved it because I made all this extra money. And I said, which film were you in? And he said, I appeared in Carnal Knowledge. I couldn't resist the line. I said, there it is, John. I didn't recognize you with your clothes on. Well, you don't get a chance to deliver lines like that very often. But anyway, the story continues because, embarrassingly, I found myself in Maine. And I had got used to using this little story as an after-dinner tale, which I did. And there were half a dozen well-meaning Americans, very nice people in the group, and they said, you were in Carnal Knowledge? And I proudly said, yes. Later in the day, I got a phone call to say, you've been invited to a cocktail party tonight, and somebody has found a copy of Carnal Knowledge. We can all watch it together. So indeed we did, and the movie went on and on and on, and it ended no sight of me or of John, my pal. We'd ended up on the cutting room floor. So our great appearance in the first sexy movie to come onto the big screen was a disaster. Not only were we left on the cutting room floor, but after boasting about it, I had to sit through and uncomfortably say, oh dear, oh, they must have cut the scenes. It sounded as if I was telling absolute porkies. But I'm not. Sorry about that. It's my loose finger again. There we are. On the video version, anyway, I lay not naked on the cutting room floor, and unfortunately, that's where I will remain, because I don't think the television version will show any of the scenes that I was in. My stardom from that has ended. It's dried up. It ain't there anymore. But just to finish this little story about appearing in films and so on is what happened, particularly being front of camera in any area, particularly in Vancouver, and I suppose perhaps a little bit with the gloss of being a semi-film star. I was out at Exhibition Park one night, which was the racecourse. And because our radio station broadcast the races, I was able to have a box. And I sat in the box and started to enjoy the evening. And a couple of people went by, and one of them said, "Hey Keith, I understand that you were filming the other day, you're an extra." And I shouted back, "Yes," I said, "one of my autographs now is worth 3 of John Wayne." And I heard a little ripple behind me, and I looked behind me, and who was there? Yes, the big man himself. My God, the film industry has left me with embarrassment all over the place. He was very gracious. He grinned and he waved. I didn't dare ask for his autograph. But being a film extra has its benefits when you look at the bank account. Till my next tall tale, toodle-pip.
Carnal Knowledge, Jack Nicholson, Anne Margaret, Art Garfunkel, and Candace Bergen in Mike Nichols' Carnal Knowledge. Now it's time has come.
He sat on the bank, while the river still chattered onto him, a babbling procession of the best stories in the world. That was the excitement that Mole experienced in the story Wind in the Willows. And indeed, rivers large and small everywhere all have many stories to tell. The River Ouse that flows through Lewis is no different. In fact, for much of the town's history, it has played an important part. Today, the river carries nothing but pleasure craft. But for a long time, it was a busy, bustling port. About a mile upstream from here is the village of Hamsey. It sits on a triangle of land which splits the river as it curves down towards the town. Hamsey is barely a village today. A few houses with the 13th century church standing in splendid isolation. But Hamsey was a Saxon port in the pre-Norman era. Historians estimate that over 1,000 people lived here, populating a port that saw ships sail up the Ouse to trade goods. There is no doubt that the Normans had a bit to do with its demise. The area was handed over to a Norman lord. But the community was attacked by an enemy it couldn't stop. An army of rats, which disembarked from one of the visiting ships, went ashore and infected the village with bubonic plague, the Black Death. The disease devastated Hamsey. And while there is no historic evidence, legend has it that the residents barricaded themselves in to prevent unaffected people coming in and diseased people getting out. Eventually, they starved to death. Named after the black rats which carried the plague, the Black Death killed over half the population in Britain between 1348 and 1349. The survivors founded another village off Ham, the modern thriving village of Opham. The plague attacked Lewis several times over the following centuries, each time causing significant loss of life. So death continued to stalk Lewis, bringing tragedy to the high street in rather greater measure than other UK high streets. Hamsey gone, but Lewis as a port flourished. Ships and barges plied their trade up and down the Ouse, creating an exciting and bustling waterway. Many of these buildings, which stand on an extension of the high street in an area called Cliff, are built with old ship's timbers. Where Argos now stands was a sailor's pub called the Bear, built as a brewery in 1787, and it succumbed to the carelessness of revelry and burned down in 1918. This quiet domestic street, which runs for a short distance parallel to the Ouse, was the sailors' playground, and history relates that there were more than a dozen brothels successfully operating. Today, this street is known as Little Chelsea. Even the name makes it seem a nice place to live. The rather small abodes have found favour with many modern Louisians and are now favoured homes. And why not? They look good in a twee kind of way. And if you're not living in a former brothel, there are other historical backgrounds to raise the interest. All this talk of pubs and trading around town, it saps my energy. So I sometimes come to this little oasis. The Notts Garden in Southover Park, a lovely little hideaway. Back to the High Street, or at least its extension into the cliff area of Lewes. So I've been wandering around here because Lewes is full of antique stores and models. As I mentioned, go inside some of these shops and you'll find that they're supported by old ship's timbers. Another reminder of the days when Lewes was a port. All this talk of water has made me thirsty. I made several mentions of the time Lewes had 63 pubs. As you would expect, Among the 16 that are left, there are some with strong ties to the community. Over the road from the shops, held up by ship's timbers, is the Gardener's Arms. There seems to be a tradition in Lewes, although no one admits to it, of omitting the epithet pub or tavern. This pub is called by locals simply the Gardener's. And the Gardener's it was. The origins of this pub go back to when it was an ordinary house, owned by a gardener. Often, after work, he would invite other gardeners into his front room for a drink. Eventually, it made sense to formalize the ritual, so it turned into a pub. The Gardener's is a true pub. Unusual now, it only serves pork pies and sausage rolls. Yet each year it's in the top tier of finalists for Pub of the Year. Magnificent. Back to the Street of 1,000 Brothels. Well, perhaps not 1,000, but a few anyway. There's a pub called the Snowdrop. Nice pub, they tell me. Interesting for its name and where it stands. This is the site of England's deadliest avalanche. Just after Christmas in 1836, heavy snow built up on the edge of the downs. There were 7 cottages here where the pub now stands. Despite warnings, the people living there went about their business, totally unconcerned about the snow. Then whoosh! Down it came, demolishing 7 cottages and taking the lives of 8 people. Time, gentlemen, please. Not heard now, but the admonishment of past landlords that it was time to quit drinking should have been heeded by the cottagers. A disaster both for the country and the town. A brief mention of one last hostelry, the John Harvey Tavern. Named after the founder of a local brewery, the one of 16 to survive to the modern day, Harvey's has been around since at least 1790. And an important inhabitant. Along with Mole and Ratty on the banks of the River Ouse. More on that later. For the moment, back to the bar. How I wish I'd lived in Lewes when it had 63 pubs. Bliss. You might think, from the pubs I've been into, that Lewes is a drinking town. The town constable in the late 1800s didn't think so. The town constable in 1890 didn't want it to be. Here are some notes from the High Constable of Lewes, a gentleman called John Holman, dated 1880. Sunday, the 10th of October, visited all the public houses during morning service. All in good order, except Lewis Arms, several there tippling in service time. Sunday, the 17th of October, visited public houses, all in very good order, except the Lewis Arms. Again, a second time, several persons in both parlour and taproom tippling at 11:30, time of divine service, gave the landlord a caution. Sunday, the 14th of November, visited public houses as usual, witnessed very great indecency in the person of George W. Several persons were tippling during divine service, and on our approach to do our duty, they were permitted to hide themselves upstairs in the pub. This was the 3rd or 4th offence of the same kind. Wow, a bit different today. But beer is very close to the hearts of this Sussex town, because it's one of the main employers and industries. Earlier, I mentioned the John Harvey Tavern. John Harvey started his brewery on the banks of the River Ouse in 1790. He was one of the 16 that flourished here at one time. Now, with just the odd microbrewery popping up here and there, it's the only one. The brewery is close to the hearts of the community. The pubs it owns have in the main remained traditional, while its method of delivery has most definitely remained in the past. Miles Jenner is the chief brewer, and his range of beers reflects the activities of the local community. The dray that trots around town is a symbol of the tradition of the brewery, but also of the town. The beer maker turns out beers named after local events: Firecracker, Tom Paine, Bonfire Boy, and Lewis Castle. The name Harvey, synonymous with Lewis. You've been around, or the brewery has been around for quite a long time. Can you develop a little bit of the history for us?
Yes, the family came down, the Harvey family, from London. They were wine and spirit merchants at the end of the 18th century, and they started brewing in Lewis and on this site in the early 19th century.
I can stand next door to a man in a pub in Lewis, and he will swear that Harvey's tastes quite different to anything else, and he won't drink anything else. I mean, what's the secret of the product?
Any brewer's beer is really a derivative of his water and yeast strain. We never talk of water, we talk only of liquor, but a local water supply and the brewer's yeast strain, it gives his beer an individual character. You could take our recipes, exactly the same raw materials, go and brew at another brewery with their water and all their yeast and have a totally different brew at the end of it.
Talking of water, and you mentioned that the barges came up the Ouse. How important was that to the brewery in the past?
Well, I think it was very important. It was, a fundamental form of communication, and if you were bringing a fair few tons of barley upstream, then it was a very sensible way of delivering. But just as industry sent stuff out to the river, so the river sent stuff back to them, and it wasn't unusual to brew with river water around your feet. And the last big flood we had in 2000, we were 6 foot deep in river water. We got our product together very well, we had a good reputation, the brewery was re-equipped, and we were producing a beer which became very much identified with the local community and was dear to their hearts. The fact the building is actually known as Lewis Cathedral tells you something about the way that Harvey's is viewed in Lewis.
The brewery flourished, but Lewis as a port rapidly declined. The familiar barges that had plied the River Ouse in the early 19th century carried loads of clay to the town. But the clay was used to build the beds for railway lines, and the death knell for river traffic sounded. The ships had consigned themselves to history. The first train to run from Lewis was in 1846. Since then, the railway has become an important junction in the national network. Trains from Lewis station run to Brighton in the west, Hastings in the east, Newhaven Port in the south, and London in the north. There have been successes and failures. Other lines were axed over time, with one, the Bluebell Railway, preserved as a steam preservation project. Back to our tale of the High Street. Cliff High Street is an extension of the High Street ending at the base of the Downs. At the end of it is an ancient church, St. Thomas of Becket. The Black Death wasn't the only medieval disease to strike Lewis. Leprosy was rife. This infectious and unsightly blight is first recorded in Lewis in soldiers who took part in the Battle of Lewis. It seems that the monks of the priory tended leprous people in 2 hospitals. Of the larger hospital, St. Nicholas, little remains, but the smaller hospital of St. James also treated lepers. Bones of the hundreds who died in the Battle of Lewes showed that leprosy was widespread. Don't wear this hat to look pretty, you know. There's a Sherlock gene in me somewhere that gets me into more trouble than enough. So I'm going to stick my head above the parapet and suggest that there's evidence of leprosy here long before the Normans paddled ashore at Hastings. The church of St. Thomas of Beckoning Cliff, that's the very far end of the High Street, up against the Downs, has a leper's slit. This was a channel built into the church wall, so that lepers could take Holy Communion without infecting the congregation. St. Thomas's is a very ancient church, with bits of it predating the Normans by quite a few years. The interesting thing about this slit is that it starts and ends inside the church itself. Additions were made to the church over the years, so it appears that the leper's slit was built into the original church, but encompassed within it as it was enlarged. Certainly leprosy entered Europe about the 4th century, but was only virulent in the 11th. But it seems that the disease was already in Lewes well before that. Anyway, the Cluniac Priory tended to lepers until a certain king's greed and love life shut the priory down. So leprosy can be added to the Black Death as a scourge of Lewes. But let's shuck off the historic events of bloody Lewes and celebrate the river, the way that our friends in Wind in the Willows did, the lovable Mole and his friend Gung-Ho Ratty. Each summer, a raft race is held on the Ouse by the local round table. Teams from organisations, schools, businesses and even groups of individuals construct weird and wonderful rafts and race each other from Lewes down to the sea at Newhaven. Not a very fair race. The crews bombard each other with flour and water bombs, water pistols and any other old rubbish. Spectators add to the mayhem by pelting other missiles at the crews.
The first few hundred metres are quite torrid, because from the bridges here, people hurl flour bombs and eggs and all sorts of things at you, really. But when you get past Lewes, it's quite peaceful and serene down the river, and you've got the tide to help you along as well. Last year the theme was the Rio Olympics, so again it was quite open to interpretation. You could just take Brazilian culture or, of course, the Olympics. I actually took part last year. I duly sank in Newhaven Harbour, unfortunately. But obviously we put the proper safety provisions in place, and we were fished out before we were swept out into the English Channel. There's been suggestions this year that there will be pirate rafts and people drinking rum and trying to board other people's boats, but we'll see how that happens. We're limited for safety reasons to 25 rafts. In the next number of weeks, we're going to have talks with all the safety bodies, and perhaps we may be allowed more, but obviously safety is our main priority. This year I've been absolutely inundated with applications. I think I've sent out over 100 application forms.
Wow! Now how do you select which of the 25 are going to be lucky?
It's down to, in a lot of cases, the event is sponsored. So in many cases, sponsors may get priority, but overall it's just a lottery, really, and or the best rafts will be chosen.
Now, in fundraising, do people just donate, or what do you do? Do you have people shaking cans?
There's a certain amount of bucket collections, and also there's an entry fee for the raft race itself. A good portion of that money goes to the actual operational costs of providing the safety provisions and so on. But obviously, whatever's left over will go to the local charity.
Right.
This year, we're also in partnership with Newhaven Town Council, because they really wanted to get more involved, because obviously it finishes there. So this year we will be supporting a charity in Lewes and a charity in Newhaven.
A lot of people line the banks. Do you take an estimate of how many people are here on a good Sunday?
We would estimate maybe 5,000 to 7,000, but We've no way of telling really, but it seems to be a very popular event, and the people of the town are taking it to their hearts.
Yes, indeed they have. I mean, it's a wonderful occasion. After all the bloodshed and death in this little town, that regatta makes me feel a lot better. Time for a little nap, I think.
Welcome back to our drinks programme. After the first run through, we've altered the format, and I'm going to spend a little bit less time rabbiting on at the camera, and we've got a guest. A young man who's starting out in the field of wine, home wine delivery, but with fine wines. And he is going to take a run through some of the wines that he offers to tell us just how good they are, because I couldn't tell. And a friend of mine who was an expert in Canada said to me once, "Keith, I don't know how much you know about wine, and actually what I do know is I enjoy wine. I can tell some wine from the other. I can tell the difference between white and red." But no, I'm a little better than that. But he said, you know, if you ever find yourself with amongst wine snobs, of which there are many, he said, remember the seven dwarfs. He said, for instance, if you that's a dozy little number. Or a sneezy grape. But the bubbles get up your nose. Bashful. I understand that this grape, it's grown in the Napa Valley, and it's a bashful little number. But it delivers a wine that is worth buying at a fair old price. Bashful the grape may be, but the wine that it produces is excellent. And then of course, this dopey. I can't tell this one from the other one. Never admit that, but it is a way of getting by. Saying, oh, dopey wine, dopey wine, dopey wine. And then, of course, we could go on to happy, particularly if you've got a bit of champers, which is my favourite tipple. A glass of champers in your hand, that's a happy number. Isn't it? Little bubbles get up your nose, they bring a smile to your face. Indeed, they do. And the one for is a sleepy wine. How do you do a sleepy wine? Well, you can say it's a sleepy wine. It's creeping up on the outside. Delightful, but takes a little time to mature. Oh, you can get away with all sorts of conversations by looking and sounding as if you know what you're talking about when in fact you don't. And that was how he actually decided that you would handle, well, not he, but he and his mates, that's how they handle wine snobs. And there are many around, believe me. However, don't mistake a wine snob with somebody who really knows his wines, because there are people who are experts, not in the wine trade, but they are experts, and they know a good one from a bad one. I had the same friend who alerted me to this, and he came over to visit from Vancouver, and he was desperate because he was into wine in a very big way to see various things. And he said, you know, somewhere in England there's something called the English Wine Centre. And I was able to say, yes, it's no more than about 3 miles from here. And in fact, the English Wine Centre is at Drusilla's Corner, as it's known. And a lovely little centre which gives the history of wine, but also a nice little vineyard. And when they do it, they have wine fairs and festivals the English Wine Festival that takes place there. And it's a very pleasant experience. So it's just down the road. So I was able to take him down the road. And we were discussing English wines. And of course he said, you do know the difference, don't you, between an English wine and a British wine? And I, at that stage in my career, a few years ago, I had to say, well, no, I'm not absolutely sure that I do. An English wine is one that comes from a grape grown in Britain. A British wine is one that's made here, but it's using a sort of solution brought in from another country, mostly from France, and which is made up here. The sugar and the water and so on is added. We are, British wine is not a domestic wine at all. English wine is native. But Christopher Ann, who was departed this mortal coil, was a leader in developing wines here in Sussex. I say that knowing that we go back to Roman times, but in recent times he promoted English wines when they were considered, because of the grape being a hybrid, not to be eligible for EU tax. Now, broadly, I haven't got it exactly right, but broadly that's why English wines were so expensive, so very expensive. So, that is changing. Well, it will change really with Brexit. But it did change before, and English wines started to become very popular in English wine stores and with drinkers of a decent wine, because our wines here regularly win open tastings all over the world. We turn out a very, very decent plonk here, and they have some lovely names, Breaky Bottle. Some of the others actually escape me right now, as often names do. But there are some very colourful names, so watch out for English wines. They are better than the reputation that came before them. They have matured at a reasonable price, and they're not a bad plot. Anyway, we'll just leave it at that, I think. We won't, because I did want to mention, going away from wines, one other thing that we have here. And we have a pub that is called the Snowdrop. And the Snowdrop has been through a variety of owners, but now its food is considered to be second to none. It's a lovely, lovely pub, tucked away at the outer extremity of Lewes, but walkable. And the Snowdrop is named because it stands on the site of the worst avalanche that England ever experienced. In fact, the worst avalanche the UK has ever experienced. 10 people died, row of cottages were demolished, others were hurt, and so on. And it happened in 1836. In 1836, coming up to Christmas time, December, it was one of the worst winters that this country had ever experienced. The snow built up on the edge of the downs, to the point where it was overhanging and looking very dangerous. But the cottagers have seen all this before. Come on, all out, all out. No, 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 no. We've been there before. Settle back and enjoy your pint. Whoosh! And the snow came down and demolished the cottages and killed 8 people and injured many more. So on that site, the pub that now stands is called the Snowdrop and helps us to recall the worst avalanche ever in British history. Okay, well, we'll talk to Fergus in a minute, because he knows what he's talking about as opposed to me. 63 pubs and 17 breweries. Oh, I do lust over those times. For the moment, toodle pip.
welcome to another exciting part of our Tipple Along With Me by Keith Hayes, who is not in this programme at the moment. And this is Fergus.
Hi there, Melissa, how are you doing?
He knows loads about wine. I'm doing well, thank you.
Good. I know a little bit about wine, but we'll go from there, yeah.
Well, more than me, because I know nothing.
Good.
So.
Well, hopefully this session will be a bit of an education for you. And I brought two amazing wines to start off with as well. So one's from Portugal, from the Douro region, and the other one's from Chile as well. And both are fine examples of what these sort of overlooked regions overlooked regions in the wine world, and the wines that they produce sort of need a little bit more shouting about, really. So I'll happily start off with the Smiling Donkey here. It's got a funky little name, I really like it. But it's famous, so the Douro region's famous initially for its port, which is a fortified wine. And it has 5 main principal grape varieties that are grown in there. And then I actually blended in this grape as well, in this bottle.
So the port, the wine that's used for the port is in.
So the port is like it's a fortified wine that is in there, and the grapes that are used in this bottle are also used in port as well, and they go by a slightly different process, but the same principal grape varieties, which the Douro region is famous for, are used in this as well. It's also it is the oldest demarcated regions in the world, and it's also one of the oldest wine regions in the world. So grapes have been growing in Douro for over 2,000 years.
Oh wow!
So it really benefits the region from a very warm and continental climate. It sort of sits just north, sort of the northeast region of Portugal, and stretches along the Douro River, which so it benefits from like warm current breezes coming off the river, which help regulate the temperatures throughout the growing season. But it's also sheltered by the Mirador Mountains as well on the west side, and then it kisses the border of Spain as well. But like I was saying about the 5 main principal grape varieties, they are the Touriga Nacional, the Touriga Franca, the Tinta Rioja, otherwise known as Tempranillo in Spain, which is famous in Rioja region. Then you have the Tinta Barraca and the Tinta Cal. So all of these are blended in there, and they help produce. They each add their own little element to the wine, and then help affect its style as well. So when you taste it, you're tasting a little bit of these little things will help its balance, help with the intensity, helps provide its deep, rich colour, and it goes from there. It's beautiful. Should we have a try?
Yeah, please.
Smashing. So normally you can, with a corkscrew, you can take it off. What I recommend is to take it off just below this little lip there, because sometimes when bottles are stored away, they collect dust. So if you take it just above there, when you go to pour it, the wine sort of catches on this little bit, it picks up a little bit of the dust. So what I always like to do is I just cut it underneath there, so when you do pour it into the wine glass, no dust is there, and you're all happy. Everybody's happy. Or you can simply, if you can do, just rip it off as well. If you can do, sometimes they do it. This one's doing a little bit tricky, but there we go. And you're just left with that, which is nice.
I don't think I'd be able to do that. So is this region also known for their donkeys?
So, you would have to say that it probably would do, given the name of this. So this region is the reason why we have a smiling donkey on the front, is because this donkey is the Mirador donkey. And this donkey was usually originally used in the agricultural land to help farmers when there was no machines around. But ever since mechanization, these sort of donkeys have become sort of an old person's friend, really, at the end of the day, or sort of like an outdoor pet, as you will. And they're now just sort of, they're not really looked after, they're coming into extinction. So in 2003, there was only about 800 of these left in the region. And so there's a real drive to get these donkeys sort of just staying in the world, really, in the sort of change of climate change and all that sort of stuff. And so if you buy a bottle of these, the proceeds, a proportion of the proceeds go towards supporting the Mirador donkeys, so that they can live a happy and wonderful life, essentially.
It makes me want to drink wine more.
Good, yeah, exactly. You never think, as much as drinking wine is fabulous, you never thought you could do so good. I especially pick these wine glasses as well for their shape. I mean, they're very attractive, elegant looking glasses. but their shape as well. You see how they're sort of they're bending inwards as well. So they're sort of like in a bulb shape. They're very intense bulb shape, but they have a bulb shape nonetheless. When you swirl the wine, so how you try and pick up all the aromas that wine can produce, it helps collect all these aromas and smells, so that when you stick your nose in it and have a good sniff, you can smell all the lovely flavours that these have. So a good way of doing it, you can either, given it on a flat surface, you can spin it around like that, or if you're a little bit more advanced, you can take it in your hand and spin it like that. Hopefully the wine should stay in there. That's how we go about it. We just give it a little swirl. You can already smell, even if you put your nose quite clear, you can sort of smell the aromas anyway. It's quite pungent, quite very like pronounced flavours on there, which is lovely. And what you'd expect from the Smiling Donkey and its 5 principal grape varieties that I talked about, you expect like really dark fruit flavours that are coming. So you're looking for like black currants, black cherries,
cherry.
and all that sort of stuff. Exactly.
Cherry
So yeah, it's very nice and pronounced, which I think this is why these sort of wines should be more considered in the world. And so yeah, we'll give it a little swirl and just do like a couple of like short, sharp sniffs. If you can, try and stick your nose in, and you can get it away with it. And you can, if you can pick up anything else, I can sort of as well pick up a little bit of smoke and a little bit of wood in there if you can do. And so that shows that it's also been fermented in probably oak as well, which adds to that sort of flavour complexity, and also helps lower the level of tannins, or reduce the harshness of tannins, which we'll go into later as soon as we taste it, which is exciting.
Smell like corkscrew.
Yeah, beautiful. Should we go ahead?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect.
It's good.
Do you like it?
Oh, it's not what I'm used to.
Oh yeah. Good thing.
I'm a basic girl. I just drink white wine.
Okay, cool. Well, it's a new experience anyway. Yeah. But what I should have said before as well, when you taste it, you want to try and, a bit like we did with the nut when we were smelling it, you want to try and swirl it all the way around your mouth. Really sort of get the flavours going all across your mouth, so it touches each bit part of your mouth, because tongue is very important for tasting. Also the general feel and also the body of the wine you'll get to feel if you put it all across your mouth as well. I sort of just brushed my teeth probably a few hours ago as well, so I'm sort of I can do the effects are sort of there, but not really. But we'll go again. So yeah, really try and, some people like to call chewing the wine, but I'm a little skeptic of that one. So just try and imagine just swirling around in your mouth as much as you can for say a few seconds, and then swallowing it, and then we'll see you go from there.
Right.
So you get that sort of, that drying sensation, that little bit of.
I think now I feel like I smell cherry, but I taste more like black currant.
Okay, good.
Is that?
Yeah, that's perfectly all right. Yeah, a lot of the, even if they may not be, you may not pick it up as much in the nose or in the palate, you can hold. It's usually the sort of similar sort of field. So if you can pick up a more intense flavour on the mouth and in the nose, then you're still in the right field. It's quite good.
So is that just my nose and my mouth being different?
No, they're just picking up different things, or maybe your nose isn't that used to, and you can just clearly got a good mouth for black currant, I guess. But yeah, you could. What I definitely felt was just sort of in my mouth, sort of a covering, or sort of like a dry covering around the mouth. I don't know whether you felt that. That's what the presence of tannins, and tannins are in the grapes and the skins. They're along the skins and the stem of the grape, and then when it goes about fermenting, how red wine production is made. Basically, they pick all the grapes off the vines. They crush them, so just to release the juices a little bit, help with the whole alcoholic fermentation of the whole thing. And red wine is a little bit different to white wine in that the skins, as well as a little bit of the stems, goes into the sort of the fermentation of it to allow these sort of tannins to come through. And so this tannins are only applicable to red wines, whereas you wouldn't really find them in white wines as well. You just wouldn't find them, because the skin skins aren't in contact in white wine production making process. Okay. So you would just never really get it then. So then after the alcoholic fermentation, where yeast is added just to convert the sugars into alcohol, it then goes through a draining process. it is then crushed a little bit further, or pressed a little bit further anyway, just to release a little bit more of those juices. And then all the wine from the fermentation, from the pressing, goes into goes into storage or maturation. So like the oak barrels, when I mentioned that you can smell like wood or a little bit of oak flavour, this is the sort of maturation period, and it varies depending on where the region is and what the sort of the winemaker wants to do or impart flavour onto the wine. And then it goes into bottling after that. So yeah, I think that's pretty good. Should we move on to the next one? Perfect, cool. So we'll pop that one to the side and then we'll compare them later on and see what sort of differences we can do. So this one, The Art of Wine, it's a very pretty bottle, very pretty label. It's got the girl with the pearl earring, which is a very, very, very famous painting by Johannes Vermeer. Yeah, Chile. So Chilean wines are sort of, again, they lie, it's in the South America, it lies on the west of the country, and benefits also a little bit to Portuguese wines in terms of their climate as well. So you have the Pacific winds coming in from the west, but you've also got the Andes, which separates Chile and Argentina.
Yeah, it's a bit colder as well.
It's a little bit colder, yeah. But it's also a little bit colder, I guess, towards the south of the region, but it can sort of vary as well. So the winds do help to bring that sort of cooling effect to the grapes. But it's also quite, as you work your way up north of the country, obviously it gets closer to the equator. A lot of the wine producers tend to have their vineyards higher up on the mountains and benefit from having a cooler climate up there. Because sometimes, in regions where it is particularly hot, the grapes can get blistered essentially. A bit like if we spend too much time in the sun, these grapes sort of get blistered as well in some sort of way, and that really imparts quite a bad taste or imparts bad flavours into the grapes essentially. You just wouldn't want to be walking around red all day if you were sunburning, as us do. So it's a bit similar in that case as well. But Merlot is a particularly very versatile grape as well. It's obviously made famous by the Bordeaux being a part of a blend in that, and actually the French sort of made it popular in Chile as well. The Spanish brought it over, but the French popularised it in Chile and really got it going in there. And so it's actually one of their most mass exported grapes as well, because it grows so well in this. And this particular comes from the Central Valley, which is one of Chile's largest and probably most famous wine growing areas as well. It stretches a long way across the country, to be fair. But a lot of grapes really grow well in this sort of warm, dry climate, similar to this, which is again great for growing grapes as well, because it's a bit like any other plant. It requires photosynthesis. So the sun reacts with the water, helping produce glucose or sugar in this, and then that goes straight to the grapes, helping it sort of swell and imparting all the lovely flavours that we get on here. But yeah, I reckon we should have a try.
Hold on. What is this malarkey about them tasting wine without me? I don't like that. So, unfortunately, I have to stop this program right where it is. Because I was supposed to be the one to taste it. Just because I was late by a few minutes. Doesn't give them the right to do it without me. So, the next wine, girl with the pearl earrings. Watch out. You have to deal with me next time.
Well, there you are. Now, the plan is that that section will be a bit shorter, in fact, just half an hour. And, half to 3/4 of an hour to give you some new material that we're producing. And to also make sure that some of the key features is sometimes our campaigns, sometimes looking at energy and so on and so forth can be accommodated.
But generally speaking, at this particular stage, we'll have taken a break, and then we will come back at 10:30, which is in 2 minutes' time, with one of our interviewees, the Suzanne Michaud, Melissa Conti, Jane Watkins, and Liza Page, to give you some more entertainment for another half hour, taking us up to 11 o'clock. But we're only just putting this into place. So for today, we don't have any interview, but we played an extra long session of program material. So we're going to actually leave you on that note. And I hope that you'll enjoy the new way that we're doing things, and you'll tap in from time to time. So shall we say? Yes, we shall. We shall say toodle pip, and we'll see you tomorrow at 8:30 as usual with the news headlines. Raja. Till then, and it's a nice day outside. It's going to reach, well, it's 9 degrees now. It's going to reach almost 12 at the height of the day. So we give you a little blessing for the day. I, unfortunately, have to go to the hospital this afternoon. That's why I'm actually doing the program from home this morning. And I hope that you'll forgive the not being in the august surroundings of the White Hart Hotel. Certainly we'll be back there tomorrow. Big blazing log fire and all. Right? That's it for today. Tomorrow we shall see you. We shall see you tomorrow. This is Keith Hayes, Mirador Television, signing off for the day. Toodle pip.